as was said, I'm Denise Needham, 7th grade science teacher at Lutz K-8 school. And the goals of the project for me were to educate my students about the COVID pandemic, how the disease spreads, what causes it, who's most at risk, how to protect yourself. I wanted to encourage my students to educate their family members about what we were learning. And I was hoping to spark a change in the way my students think about diseases and following safety guidelines. Unfortunately, children touch everything. They touch each other constantly, and they're not aware of what they're touching, or they're not thinking about it, and they're eating, putting things in their mouths. And I was really hoping to stop that sort of thing. And, with something like this going around with COVID, it's a good opportunity for us to do that. So a little bit about me. I've been teaching middle school science for 14 years. The regular 7th grade curriculum includes a unit on infectious agents. So this would fit right into that unit. I didn't know much about the virus, obviously, like everybody else, but I was very eager to learn all I could. Since infectious agents was already a part of my curriculum, I knew that I would be including COVID in the upcoming school year. So I joined the USF project to learn more for myself, as well as gain information to pass on to my students. So at the time, school had just ended on a shutdown for the entire 4th quarter, and I had been staying home for weeks, but my husband did work the entire time. On July 12th, he came home with a fever and headache, and in not too long, he started having chills and fatigue, sore throat, cough. He did have a fever up to 102.5. A few days later, I started showing symptoms. I would have a lot more of them than he did: fever, chills, headache, fatigue, cough, scratchy throat, nausea, diarrhea, loss of taste and smell. All of my symptoms were very minor, though. We never experienced anything that, we felt we needed to be, to go to the doctor or be hospitalized. My highest temperature was 100.5. On July 17th, I did go in and test, and found out later that I did test positive for COVID-19. Now, before contracting the disease, I was really worried about getting it. That's all you saw in the news was all the bad stuff. People getting hospitalized on ventilators, and the death. And so we were very, very worried when we started feeling sick. Of course, after a few days, we realized, it's not affecting us so badly. After the fever subsided, about 3 days later, we were feeling much better. I was symptom-free in less than a week, except for the loss of taste and smell and some pretty substantial fatigue. And they lasted for a couple more weeks. But looking on the bright side, I always try to do that. I did have some personal experience to share with my students when I taught the unit. And what's funny is when I did share, they were very shocked to learn that I had it, or had it in July. And I don't know if they just had heard all the bad and they were surprised that, I was still alive, or if, just surprised, oh my gosh, that's all in the news and she had it too. But they were all very surprised. So as far as creating the unit, the science team agreed to teach the unit using a Nearpod presentation. And our Nearpod presentation contained many features to engage and interest the students. For instance, links to websites and articles, like we pulled up a lot of CDC articles, videos, and mini assessments, quizzes, matchings, fill in the blank, bulletin board posts. And the students did comment that the Nearpod made the lesson really interesting, and they appreciated the interactive features that we included. So I teach 7th and 8th grade science at Lutz K-8, and I do have 5 7th grade science classes and 1 8th grade. When I began this unit earlier in the year, 2 of my 7th grade classes were online. I have only 1 online now. I am the only 7th grade science teacher, so all of our 7th grade students did get this lesson. I have students that range from ESE with learning disabilities to gifted students, reading levels from very low 1s all the way up to 5s. I have students that read at like a first and second grade level, so I have a range of levels in all of my classes. Now, in my classes that are at school, in-house, they are grouped with similar levels, but my e-learning class, just the one now, but at the time, the two were all ranges in both classes. So it was pretty much a challenge for those. As far as how I modified my curriculum, the primary thing that I did was just to add the COVID-specific lesson to my unit on infectious agents. And this did end up adding about 2 weeks of instruction in the unit. I also added COVID information where applicable. We studied cells and human body. Obviously, we could talk about it during that time as well. When we moved on to interdependence and heredity, now we are in an evolution unit, and we do have talked about bacterial evolution, and we, with drug resistance. So we were able to talk about how viruses can change, and this is new coming along. So this is all just part of change over time. We also discussed any news that comes up, specifically like with the vaccinations, the most recent news, and who is eligible and who can get it. And of course, my students aren't eligible yet because they don't have one for them. The background there you see are some slides from my Nearpod. So most of the COVID lesson was part of the infectious agents unit where the Nearpod was used for the primary instruction. And all the students were on a computer and they were able to log in to the Nearpod themselves as I guided the presentation. The students interacted with me. Nearpod included videos, articles from the websites like the CDC, posters from the CDC on like proper mask wear and how to wash your hands. It also included several mini assessments, the quizzes, the matching, fill in the blank, open-ended questions. And I included some collaborative bulletin board features that allowed the students to see responses as other students posted them. So what worked, one of the biggest things was just teaching to a timely topic. They couldn't turn on the radio or the news without seeing something about COVID-19. So they were really interested, this being a topic that they were talking about in their science class. They all had something to contribute, questions to ask. A lot of them, had firsthand experience with it in some way, shape, or form. And it was very relevant to them and to us, the teachers, which is unusual to find something that meets up with all of us because, we talk about scientists that did work 100 or more years ago, like Louis Pasteur, and it's like, oh yeah, that guy. But now this is something that's happening right now. So we're all very interested. So using the Nearpod worked very well. The students enjoyed the different features. They commented that it wasn't boring. I was able to run the presentation from my computer while they viewed and participated on theirs. And I was also able to produce reports from Nearpod to use for assessment purposes. And it was very helpful. And it was especially useful with my e-learning classes because it's difficult to make sure that those students are actually working. So with the frequent interaction and mini assessments, I was able to make sure that they stayed engaged much more effectively than just over Zoom. So some of the data that we collected, the students participated in a couple of USF surveys before and after the lesson. Some of the comments that they made about how they were affected by the COVID was, they couldn't see their dad, they weren't able to see friends for months or having to wait in lines for everything, made me have an open mind. And fail, how much I weigh emotionally and physically. It affected us financially and lost some people because of COVID. In the survey, there were questions about how to protect yourself or how to prevent washing your hands for at least 20 seconds. In the pre-survey, 75% answered that correctly, but in the post, we went up to 88%. Less than half were able to define public health in the pre-survey, but it increased to 55% in the post. Only 36 in the pre-survey and 33 in the post were able to properly define a coronavirus. 68 in the pre and 72% in the post identified inhaling respiratory droplets in the air as the likely way that the virus is transmitted. 55% of the students in the pre-survey and 32 in the post said that television was the most accurate source of information. In the pre-survey, 48% and post 46% ranked social media as the least accurate. And there was no overall majority, supermajority of students' responses regarding who is most at risk, but I compiled them here. The most chosen ones with 12 in the pre and 12 in the post, if they hooked over 65, having type 2 diabetes, obese, smokers having arthritis, and then pregnant women being the ones that were chosen the most, and then those without arthritis being second. On my quiz, 77% of the students were correct in naming the pathogen, 84% in the name of the disease, 90% could correctly identify symptoms of the disease, and 80% of who is most at risk. As far as the public health definition, only 69% got that correct, and examples of how we are affected by public health, 63%. Some challenges that I faced in this, and still some of these, is we rely so much on facial expressions and communication, and the masks take that away, so it's difficult to really relate to your students like we usually do because they just can't see what it looks like behind there. I've learned that I rely on watching other people's mouths move as they speak, so that's been difficult for me to tell what others are saying. I know some of the kids probably think I'm deaf because I'm looking at them going, what? What makes it difficult? Masks make it difficult to talk and hear others, obviously. And we have to remember to sanitize surfaces and hand out alcohol wipes to students every period, every day. And we've also had to reduce the use of shared items. So it makes it more difficult when we're using things like colored pencils, scissors, rulers, and of course, lab materials. More challenges like related to my classes on Zoom, they are not ideal. Students are not able to get the full lab experience, which is really upsetting for me because I'm trying to tailor these lessons to get them involved as much as possible. But it's hard when they can't actually do the lab and you just kind of have to explain it or show it to them. It's difficult to know if students are actually paying attention, and there's really no way to prevent cheating. And the one-on-one or small group sessions are really not possible with it. When you have a student in the classroom, you can walk up to them, see how they're doing, look at their paperwork. You can, ask them questions and talk to them one-on-one or have a quiet conversation. But we're not allowed to do breakout sessions. And so I can't talk to one-on-one unless I do a special tutoring. And I just don't have students interested in coming back at the end of the day to jump on Zoom with me. So lessons learned that students are more interested in topics that are in the current news, such as COVID is today, and they can personally relate, have more questions, and they're more likely to participate in the discussions. I did share with my fellow teachers how great using the Nearpod was for me and how much students enjoyed the lesson. Students did ask for more lessons on Nearpod, and I want to work on that. I haven't had a chance, but it's also, we have a challenge with computers. A lot of our computers are loaned out to e-learners, and they are very hard to come by right now. That's it for my part. I thank you and look forward to the discussion and questions later.
Thank you, Denise. Now we're going to turn to Angelique. I put a note in the chat box that what we would like you to do, if you have any questions, to add them to the chat. And then after the panelists will have time for question and answer. So feel free to do that, and we'll look forward to seeing the types of questions that you have for Angelique, Denise, and Marissa and Sarah. Whenever you're ready, Angelique.
Hello, everyone. I did get a message from a participant asking for the updated link. I'm not sure if it went out to everybody.
I'll send it out one more time, Angelique. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then a couple people had to get off. They just said it was poor connection. Okay. So hopefully this is a full screen for you all. Let me know if it needs to be any bigger. Again, my name is Angelique. Thank you everyone for your time. The USF team was amazing. I know sometimes when we met, our ringer was our stomachs growling, ready to end the meeting, but we pushed through from the summer until now, so they're amazing. The middle school teachers, both from science and the math department, the collaboration piece, just positivity, the planning was amazing, and then this webinar, the platform, able to present all of our hard work, so thank you all. Background information, I am a middle school teacher. I used to teach high school as well as 4th grade, so I understand where the kids are going and where they came from. One thing that I was able to take was that achievement gap that they were missing since Q4 of last year, and just try to fill that in and meet their needs while literally surviving a pandemic. So I am doing the math portion presentation and how real-world applications support student learning. Again, I'm a Hillsborough County public school teacher. So the focus was to plan for and use these real-world, specific to the COVID-19 virus, applications of problem-solving, critical thinking within the lesson during semester 1. Building rapport with the students and allowing for a safe environment, understanding how COVID has impacted both their lives and their learning. So that was evident through discussion, surveys, one-on-one discussion, assessment, type chat, Canvas discussion posts, so just different forms of discussion. The setting at my school is a Title I school. E-learning class was completely new to all of us. So we learned the Canvas platform, the Zoom platform, Outlook platform, and our students were doing the same while working from home. They borrowed a laptop from our school. Some of them didn't have internet access. And the way that the schedule was made for this class was 7th grade regular. I had ESC resource students, so students with learning disabilities. I had 7th grade advanced, so gifted students. And then 8th grade pre-algebra students, which were levels 1s and 2 according to state exams. So these lessons that we planned for with the middle school math teachers, we're looking to align our pacing guide from the district with the state standards using our modified curriculum of EdGEMS, which is the book that we used. And it included their website, the resources, the COVID math lessons with the data, very real-time data. Some days I was changing up the numbers in the morning just based on the reports that were given by the CDC. Math lessons that we used very much so included DI. So differentiated instruction, not only for that class, but just because there were various learning abilities and levels, DI for each student, every day, which was amazing. Challenge, interesting, a delight, ahas, all of that combined in one, now reflecting on how the students performed. So again, that was during semester 1. So things that worked, and didn't work. So not related to the pandemic. A couple of things that were positive were the structure of the lesson, increased engagement, whole group discussion, student collaboration, so allowing them to have that time where I muted myself during Zoom, they were able to unmute themselves, just have that engagement piece. First couple of minutes of class, have that dialogue. If some students, due to whatever reason, weren't able to Zoom, they were still able to type in our discussion Canvas posts. At the end of the lesson, they had communication prompts, practice problems, real world application, again, that critical thinking and formal assessments. And then not related to the pandemic, a couple of the barriers, because this class was all e-learners. Again, lack of internet, lack of devices, especially the first couple weeks of school. I had a few students using our handy dandy cell phones, which some of them didn't have internet. So they were sitting in the parking lot at McDonald's or Panera or Starbucks using those small screens to try to get into Canvas, figure out how to Zoom and do the assignment at the same time, again, on such a small screen. The achievement gaps that I mentioned before were all the way from Q4 of last school year. So Friday the 13th, March of last school year, we were sent home for spring break, never to return again until August. And it seemed like a nice vacation until the reality and severity of the pandemic and the seriousness really hit us, even speaking outside of education. So students were unsure how to begin assignments, complete assignments, log in. It was a challenge to get feedback. We didn't have state exams, but we still had to prepare them for the upcoming year. A couple of our students were switching back and forth from e-learning to brick and mortar throughout semester one. So there were excessive absences in the meantime where they were kind of sort of in limbo until that paperwork was completed. Another barrier which came up many times in discussion were parental and other outside influences such as the news, the media outlets. So keeping in mind these are middle schoolers, they're still developing, they're trying to figure out where they fit between being a kid and being a teenager, a young adult, and being respectful to their peers, themselves, their teacher, and their parents, but many times their opinions were swayed. Especially we would have a few political conversations, which were interesting. And the joy of that was it was open discussion. They felt comfortable enough to have those discussions, which in my opinion, I don't feel as though that would have happened if we were in a classroom setting, just because they were at home, they were comfortable. We set the tone, that was the norm. So I want to also say that this presentation I did share with my professional learning community at my school site, so the other math teachers in my department. We went through this, we had a wonderful discussion, and I would like in the chat, if you're able to, participate as well. So this is just an engagement piece that I shared with the students. It's a poster, and I'm going to give you a couple minutes. Tell me what you see, and you can type that into the chat. What do you see from this poster? Oh, it looks like the chat might be disabled. That's okay. All right. So a couple of things that the students said were, I see someone with a mask. I see someone without a mask. I see a man. I see a woman. So just basic, general, what do you see? Then the next, I would give them about 30 seconds. What do you think? So what do you think is going on? So based off what they saw, they can form some sort of opinion. All right, well, there's an arrow that talks about risk. It looks like the top is high, the middle is moderate, and the bottom is low. And then the next step would be, what do you wonder? Again, giving them a couple of seconds, wait time to figure that out. So what do you wonder? And I had a couple of students say, oh, someone is typing, so I will give you a couple seconds. So based on the poster of what you saw, what you thought, now what do you wonder? Okay, so a couple of my students mentioned, well, green, it looks like there is a low risk, and the man and the woman both have masks on. And that led to other conversations, which sometimes we had to put in the parking lot because they were getting ahead of themselves. Someone says they don't see my presentation. Is anyone else having that issue?
I can see the presentation fine.
Okay.
I can see it fine as well.
Okay. Sorry about that. It just might be one of our barriers of connection with our internet. Okay, so another engagement piece in a totally, completely different lesson was we started talking about money, and I always remind students math is money. A lot of our students, level ones and level twos, are lower levels. I found that especially with girls in my class, they just lack the confidence of being a mathematician, of liking math. They just say, I can't do this. I don't like this class. I'm not good at math. So again, with building the rapport and setting up the climate and culture of the classroom, I let them know not to use those negative terms and to just be open-minded. So, do you like money? Well, that's math. And just relating something as a middle schooler to that lesson. So for here, we did talk about money, and then again, we're talking about that real world application of the virus. So talking about the spread of money. So if a person on day one is sick, and then on day two, they contact two healthy people and spread the virus to those people, and then on day three, those two people spread the virus. So asking them, look at this diagram. Communication prompt, please explain what you see is happening. So allowing them to have that wait time again, to write it out, and not necessarily have that immediate discussion of someone else's thoughts. A couple of things that I found pleasantly surprised were, okay, well, miss, what happens if the first person was social distancing, or they didn't leave their house, or they made sure they didn't get sick, or they washed their hands, which had me reflect on this, just this small part, this engagement piece was, at the beginning of these lessons, none of us were leaving our house. We were all e-learners for a reason. So they weren't really having that many interactions with people that lived outside of their household. So some of them weren't understanding how quickly this virus can spread, like how contagious it was, or how to contract it. The nice thing about this project was my students also had a science teacher that was doing the same exact Nearpods. So they were getting the science portion and the math portion at the same time at my school site. So taking notes, explaining graphs, we went from linear to now this type of growth, which is exponential, and it relates to the previous diagram. And then related to the pandemic, but not necessarily the virus, on this slide, we were talking about cell phone usage. So using devices and being an e-learner, having online lessons, how much talk time. So comparing two students that are being quarantined during this pandemic, so they're not able to attend school, being specific in this sentence and making sure that they understood the vocabulary was also really important because everything was just newer to all of us. It was very fresh. So what does quarantine mean? What is isolation? What is a pandemic? Social distancing. So this is not related to the virus, but again, it is related to the pandemic. A couple of the students mentioned, I don't have a cell phone, or we don't have internet. So again, circling back to those previous conversations and how this COVID-19 pandemic has affected their lives and their education. Okay, so this student practice lesson, we talked again, not necessarily about the virus, but how the pandemic has affected their lives, either directly, indirectly. So unemployment rates in Florida. And at the time, we looked from January till June each month and how those rates were. So the students with this question would place the unemployment rates in order from least to greatest. So they're understanding decimal numbers. They're understanding what employment meant, the pandemic, the time frame. Why was it that 1 month the unemployment rate may have been lower or higher than another? This sparked conversations of, oh, I have a parent that's unemployed, or we actually had to leave our home and move in with another family member due to our, financial, it was a crisis for them. It was just a struggle. A couple of parents, their workplaces were closed down, many retail places, restaurants, just the food industry. So this brought up other conversations. And again, having that open environment where they could talk about things at that level that was so personal was huge. It was major buy-in. It allowed them to connect to the lesson, be engaged without having to request from the teacher so many times to participate. It was like, okay, let's hold on. Let's put this in the parking lot for a second. We'll continue that conversation when we get to the next lesson. So it was a good problem to have at that time. Here we talked about positive cases. So vaccine has not come out yet during this time. So we talked about testing, accessibility. We talked about transportation, the age range, who it affects, high risk. So similar prompts that were given in science came up again in math. So here, question 1, what is the percent of positive tests from tests reported? So that was also interesting, because then we talked about the city versus, and I'm speaking on like New York City or Italy versus Sefner, Florida. that population, why would those numbers be different? Or in a rural area, why would tests not be reported? So those conversations came up as well. In this next lesson, the students practice how to convert from percent, decimal, and fraction. So we used, again, the risk of very high, high, moderate, and low. Being a carrier of the virus and giving it to someone that may be healthy with or without a mask. So all they were doing here was converting 90%, for example, to a decimal and then to a fraction. Then the same for all those levels. And again, with the social distancing or the rate of transmission contact, we were looking at the graph. That sparked was, well, the last line, the red line, is way off of the graph. Why is that? So sometimes me, myself, being a visual learner as well, I look straight at the graph. I try to analyze it before I even get to the question. So that was good conversation that we had as a class before answering those questions. And they kind of answered the questions while we were having those discussions. We used a couple of Qualtrics survey data, part 1 and part 2. I have student responses from those and what it showed. So some things that the students took away from these lessons, and you saw snippets of the lesson. Again, increased student engagement, interest in current events, discussions around these current events and news information. So even understanding what's a reliable source, how to compare sources, not to watch too much TV, and understanding who it's coming from, why are they saying it. So that was kind of turned into a political conversation that we had to cut short too. But again, that increase in student engagement was amazing. So a couple of questions that we had in discussion. Number 1, how has COVID impacted your education? 2, how has COVID impacted your personal life? So personal life includes the student, their family, and or their community. So I replaced their names just with letters for this presentation. A couple of the students said not too much, have to take virtual classes. I don't have friends visit, but that's mostly it. I have good grades now and not that bad. And then a very heavy, in my opinion, heavy response was life. So if you could just think of all aspects of that student's life and how they've been affected by it. One positive thing, if you look at the previous answer, was, I have good grades now. So it makes me as a teacher think, okay, well, what happened in 6th grade or in your previous elementary years that you weren't able to, quote unquote, make good grades? Was there something going on? In Hillsborough County, we do offer students, all students get free breakfast. There's free transportation. At my school, it's a Title I school, so I go to the Education Foundation, give them free school supplies. So it makes me think, in my mind, I'm equipping them to be successful. I'm preparing them for life. So what would be the reason that you weren't getting good grades before? And that's just why I say saying life was just a heavy kind of response for this. A couple of other students said it impacted my education by making me do my work at home. And COVID impacted my personal life by my cousins not visiting my house. So again, social distancing. When I asked this student what they meant about making me do my work at home, they weren't very happy because sometimes in the background I see parents just lingering and or popping their head in or trying to ask a question, and just establishing that norm and reminding the parent that we are in class right now. If you have any questions, you can always contact me, or conference, Zoom, write me a letter. So that was fun. Or you have the occasional, do you want to see my dog? Do you want to see my pet lizard? Again, just establishing those relationships with the students. Yeah, a couple of them were just bummed out they couldn't see their friends, which they ended up making friends with other students in the class. So they had like Zoom friends. So suggestions and challenges next time: to use complex systems to introduce lessons as a hook and then revisit those complex systems tied to solutions. So again, that critical thinking aspect. So going beyond the surface of that first layer, but really getting to the root, the whys and the hows and the solutions. Unintended challenges, which I spoke on earlier during the pandemic in relation to interacting with students. So we were all e-learners, so we didn't have a mask issue. But due to the internet access and devices, I was seeing a trend of absences. Students were able to complete work whenever their internet popped back up, so sometimes late at night or on the weekends. Students had been going back and forth between virtual and being at school. And then there was a large gap, a learning gap, due to the Step Up program that is provided during the summer. And then those adult responsibilities that were put on our students, doing household chores and caring for younger siblings, just because parents may still be at work. They may be trying to find work if they were unemployed. So I had a couple of students taking care of I would say 1 to 4 younger siblings. So everyone was across the dining room table and had a device by the end of the semester. Unfortunately, at the beginning of the semester, our county limited 1 device per household. So that was another challenge. Response to intervention is giving that DI, small group, one-on-one, lunch and learn, just meeting those needs of the students. That was a challenge because, like what was mentioned before, we weren't able to do those breakout rooms due to lack of adult supervision, but we definitely found ways to support all levels. And most of those ideas came from the students. So a couple of things that I did share with my PLC, my math team, was that it's important to include student information and data. So knowing the students, tying those pieces of information to the lesson, increasing buy-in. E-learners that are working from home due to the pandemic for various reasons. I had several students that had severe health issues. Again, at this time, there is no vaccine, just the uncertainty. So trying to keep everyone safe. November of last year, due to the students moving from being e-learner virtual back to brick and mortar, there was an increased number, and I was actually asked to return back to school. The first day that I showed up in my classroom, the kids were just thrown off. They were like, I don't see your family pictures in the background, or you're not sitting in the kitchen, or they just I have my whiteboard. We were working in the environment of the school. Sometimes they would see teachers, so that structure and consistency threw them off a couple of times. We weren't able to like take a snack break like we usually do for a couple minutes in class. So some successes that they enjoyed most all lessons, which was a huge gain from the beginning conversations of, I'm not good at math, I can't do this, I don't like this, I'm not doing it. So that enjoyment was wonderful. And I feel as though it was a combination of the Nearpod lessons in science, as well as those interactive lessons that we did in math, the multiple options for discussions. Comparing the level of engagement now from semester 1 into semester 2, with a lot of students coming back, I'm back at school. Not as many COVID lessons that are structured as they were in semester 1. That engagement has dropped off a little bit. So that was a reflective piece where I had to revamp all of my lessons and get to know my students again. Some Mondays, you just had a new group. You just keep getting a new group. So that was interesting. So inclusion of all students and just reminding them their potential and that they can accomplish their academic goals, and self-advocating for them, letting them know I'm on their team, letting them know how they can self-advocate and use self-determination skills. So an exit card that I gave to my PLC group is if they would include COVID data into their future lesson plans. If no, why not? If yes, how? So a couple of teachers responded. They all said yes, and then just in various ways. So practicing plotting points, using slope, discussing and analyzing data, encouraging engagement, real world application. So it says currently experiencing day to day, using COVID data in future lessons. So this teacher says, I'm not really sure of what specific data, but I would love the idea to use that data that's not doom and gloom, and teaching students to be learners and problem solvers. So we're not necessarily saying here are the death rates, but we can also talk about unemployment. We could talk about technology use. We could talk about a couple of different things that I've mentioned before, and having the students choose, just leaving it open for them. So thank you all, and we look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Angelique. And we want to stop sharing. And we can turn to our two panelists. I don't know who's going first.
I'm happy to go first, Alan.
Okay, great.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome. And I just have to say, I have so much respect for our middle school teachers after the work that we've done with them. We're all educators, and we were all in the middle of this thing we called the pandemic, which was, from a public health point of view, the most complex hazard and threat to our well-being probably we'll ever see in our lifetime. And here we were trying to incorporate the very thing we were living through and utilize that to enhance education. And all of us, I think, really were not necessarily mentally prepared for what we were going to experience. So you've heard from both Denise and Angelique, and I think you see how impressed we are and how much, I can tell you how much respect I have for what they were able to do, and particularly under the circumstances. So my hat's off to both of you, and thank you for sharing that. So you heard a little bit about my background. I'm a public health professional who now is an educator here at USF. And in my public health experience, I like to think I spent most of my career actually preparing for this very scenario that we're now living and that we've experienced for the last year. So I have I think, a unique perspective on it. And I have to say that what's clear to me is that we just have not done a good job, I mean the public health community, in preparing the public mentally for what a pandemic really means. And I know this from my conversations with lots of people, and certainly from everything we've seen. This idea of examining our mental models to be able to do better for really complex issues is very important in public health. And I think it's really critical in terms of education, and particularly education of the next generation of leaders. And so when Dr. Feldman asked me about participating in this, I was really excited, and I was eager to share my knowledge of the pandemic so that it could be utilized to enhance math and science education. But I was also interested in the possibility of something that I've been doing at the master's and doctoral level, which is to try to build a cadre of people, leaders, who think in systems. And I'll talk just a little bit more about that in a moment. And so there was a lot of interest in introducing systems, complex systems, and systems thinking to seventh graders. Because I know it's been done actually at younger ages too. And it was really important, I think, for all of us to think about that. So what I'd like to do is just share a few slides about that, because as you heard, we didn't really get to do that. And I understand exactly why. We were living the greatest complexity. And so trying to introduce complex systems and systems thinking was just a challenge because we were living it. All of us were living it. But that said, I think we had an opportunity through the work that the teachers were doing to appreciate and sense that, even if we didn't teach it explicitly. So again, as Angelique said, it lays the groundwork, I think, for using this experience this year and coming back and saying, okay, now what could we do to build this kind of systems thinking mindset? And I think it's right in line with what I heard Angelique and Denise saying. We want a growth mindset from our students who think that they can actually deal with these kind of issues moving forward, both individually and then hopefully collectively as they advance in their educational careers. So I'm going to share my screen. I have one poll question for you all. So hold on a second. Let's see if this works. And Alan, if you'll tell me if you can see this.
I can see it. You're not in presentation mode, though.
No, I'm doing that right now.
Okay.
So I'd like just to take a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about systems thinking and complexity. You still see it?
Yeah, I'm seeing it, but actually you're in presenters mode. I told you the wrong thing.
Okay, hold on a second.
So we're seeing your slide, the current slide, and the next slide. There you go.
All right. So now, if you'll just, if you can, I'd like you to do a one poll question with me. And you have two options. If you want to go to a web browser, you can go to pollev.com/Marlev, and you'll see the question and you can pick the answer. Or if you'd rather do it on your phone and text, you can text the word Marlev to 22333, and then you can input your options when I show the question. And these instructions will be at the top of the next slide, hopefully. Yes, they are. So if you would, choose the best answer that describes your own assessment of your systems thinking knowledge and skills. And thank you for participating. I'll just give you a couple more seconds. I know some of you may have some lag in terms of logging on. All right, 5 more seconds. So we've got the full gamut here, and this is pretty typical when I do this poll with different groups. Some people don't know what I'm talking about, which is fine. And then we do have some people who have some deeper knowledge, but many who who would like to learn about it but don't necessarily know. So I'm just going to take a moment to explain what this is and a little bit about why I think it's important. And I'm going to start with a bit of a convoluted slide. And hopefully you can see this graphic. I just will quickly walk through you. I like this because basically it says that systems thinking is a system in and of itself. And the idea, those yellow circles that you see, the systems thinking on the upper left, and the bottom one is what we're really trying to accomplish. It says the capability of identifying and understanding systems, predicting their behaviors, and devising modifications to them in order to produce desired effects. And that's basically to take the complexity and try to find meaningful aspects of it that allow us to act, particularly looking for what we call leverage points, where even small changes might have huge effects to get us to where we'd like to go. And the components of it are in some of those circles in there. It starts with understanding what system structure is by recognizing the parts and the connections, and then understanding how there is feedback from the connections and the kind of feedback that exists. And the realization that this is not static, it's dynamic, it changes. And like with a pandemic, it changes rapidly and frequently, often. So there are aspects of that, the dynamic behavior, that certainly once you get into this, you can learn more deeply. And then when you get to 7 and 8 here, what I said before is we're trying to take a very complex issue and find the simplicity in the complexity. And a lot of people have utilized models as a way of doing that. We also need to understand that this is about people in context of their family, community. You heard about politics and the natural environment. So it's what we call a nested system concept, and each of those levels interacts with the other, which is part of what makes it so complex. So this is a very quick overview of what systems thinking is all about. And frequently we show this iceberg model because typical of complex issues, we only see what's on the surface, but what's underneath is critical, if not even more important. And so as we were thinking about introducing this to 7th graders, we wanted to not only take the pandemic event and the things that were on the surface, but begin to understand some of the patterns that existed, the patterns of behavior, the structures in our school, in our community that resulted in some of the outcomes that we were seeing. And then even deeper is getting to those mental models. And you know, if you heard our 2 teachers' presentations, they talked a lot about opinions and positions. And I think it's really important for our young students to develop those critical learning skills and to understand their own mental model assumptions, but to challenge them. And I'll end by saying I think the most important thing is to build to what we call double loop learning, where we go from the single loop learning concept of we take our perspectives and our assumptions and we evaluate what's going on and have some actions. Do something, see the results of that, and then just loop back and change our actions. But double loop learning is deeper. It means that on that bottom loop, we actually challenge the whole underpinning of our assumptions, and we have to get past our own defensiveness. I think this is a critical aspect of being a critical thinker, and I'd love to see us continue our efforts to see if we can introduce this at younger age groups, because I see in the older students and graduate levels that there are a lot of fixed concepts and ideas, lots of deeply seated assumptions. And if we can help our younger students do better reflection, I think we can help our older students allow themselves to get deeper into actually dealing with complexity and complex systems. So I'm going to stop there and stop sharing. Hold on one second. And I'll just close by saying a hearty thank you to the whole team, to all of the teachers, and you provided me a frontline view of what was happening in the schools, which was critical because I was playing a role also advising at the community level and even advising the school district, and your feedback was absolutely critical in terms of them being able to make better policy decisions, because it was tough for everybody. So Alan, I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you. Sarah?
All right. Well, thank you very much. And first, I'd just like to really, again, thank Angelique and Denise. The presentations were outstanding and you gave us so much to think about. So I'm going to make a few comments, and then I would love to just throw some questions your way, Angelique and Denise, and just get some of your thoughts. So my background is math education and teacher education. And so very much I had the lens of thinking about what enabled these teachers to want to do this project, to be able to be so successful in it. How does working with the teachers affect working with the students? And so I'd like to talk about that a little bit. But first, I've been engaging in conversations with other math education colleagues around the country. And one of the things that we've been talking about is that the pandemic acted a little bit like a pressure cooker that revealed cracks that were already existing in math education, and I think in STEM education overall. And so one of the cracks that really became so apparent is that we have not done enough to connect school learning in math and science to home learning and knowledge of math and science in children's home lives. And so there's just been quite a dichotomy between school and academic knowledge and the knowledge that children have intuitively and just in being, living with their families and in their communities. They do have math and science knowledge that they gain there. And in math education, we call that funds of knowledge, and just how important it is to try to leverage those. And so the pandemic did bring to light sort of the lack of connections we have had with parents, because all of a sudden now we really needed parents as our partners, and I think it just became clear how much more communication we need with parents. I do find this a really hopeful thing about what our presenters shared with us, because from both Denise and Angelique, I heard in those presentations comments like, how did this affect your home? How is this affecting your family? And so it's a much more humanizing view of this STEM learning when we're able to have academic conversations that involve our everyday lives. And so I just wanted to highlight that that's something that I heard from the presentations that was really strong. And I think when we think about the unintended consequences and the intended consequences of doing something like this integrated STEM lessons, I think we could anticipate that there would be more student engagement, because we do understand that if we're talking about things that are, of deep importance and impact to students, are going to be more engaged. So I think that's, to some extent, an intended consequence. But the extent to which then that carried forward with students, that affected the teachers' desire to do more of that, those are some sort of maybe more far-reaching consequences. So now my question for Angelique and Denise is, there were on the first slide we saw that there were 8 teachers, and there are 2 of you who are really able to bring this all the way to fruition to present with us tonight. And of course, your other colleagues did quite a bit, but it became clear that there were so many different pressures, and those are some of the unintended, consequences and the things that just made this really challenging. And so I think it's not just, did this project work or not work? And you definitely showed us evidence of student learning, but it's sort of like, what were the conditions that made it work? And I'm really curious if you all would be willing to share your thoughts on what sort of enabled you, why did you sign up? And then what enabled you to sort of go the long distance with this amidst all the pressures? And maybe could you identify some things for your colleagues, maybe the ones that were in this, the collaboration, or that could not join the collaboration, but maybe you talked to about integrating COVID, and what were some of the challenges? And I'm thinking just that by you communicating this to us, we can understand better some of the unintended consequences, and maybe have that broader perspective of what it took for a teacher to be involved, and maybe better understand the things that make this type of collaboration among so many different people possible.
Denise, do you want to answer first?
I can. I
Okay.
can. I can try. Well, I was taking notes, so I knew what you asked, or so I could remember, because I get a little crazy and forget things. So, as far as signing up, like I said in my presentation, when this all came about, since we teach infectious agents in 7th grade science, I knew that I was going to be teaching it. So why not learn more? Why not do something interesting and cool? It sounded really fun as well. I love to learn. So, I felt there was some things that I was going to be able to learn as well. So, those things were on my mind when I got the email, to apply. And going the distance, I think this is probably just like a character flaw that I have. I just can't give something up. I'm just like, if I start something, I have to finish. And I'm the type of person that just, oh, I can't believe that they aren't doing it, that, oh, they're just dropping out. How can you just stop halfway through something? So that was the thing for me. There were a lot of challenges. Definitely this year was a huge challenge. I took on a new curriculum with my 8th graders that I'd never taught before, integrated physical science. And I had many tearful nights when things just kind of came down on me, and it was really hard. Plus you have the pandemic, and you have e-learning, and like Angelique mentioned, learning how to teach online. Nobody taught us how to teach online, and I'm not really sure if I even know at this point. But we were just kind of thrown into it, so that was that was very much stressful. It's kind of winding down now, and they tell us we're not going to have to do it next year, so I'm looking forward to that.
Can I ask a follow-up question, and then Angelique, I would love to hear your response. But I'm wondering, Denise, do you think you could have done this without sort of the collaboration between USF and Hillsborough County? So with the team, or to what extent did you need sort of those supports to make this lesson possible?
I would have included COVID in my infectious agents unit, but it probably would have just been, just another day of, oh, by the way, COVID is a virus kind of thing. So I did learn a lot about it. We did include, I had no idea what public health was. I had never heard of that before. So, I learned about that, and we did include it and teach it, and talked about it a lot. And it's interesting though, it's something that you do know of. You just didn't know that it had a name, I guess. And when I hear a lot of news, I was just listening to I listened to a lot of Dr. Radio on Sirius XM, and they were talking about at the beginning of the pandemic how certain people were trying to convince governors and the president and so forth that this is real and we need to do something. And they were talking about, yes, and we got in contact with the public health offices here and there, and I said, oh, I know what that is now. So
Yeah,
it definitely helped me there.
yes.
I'm still trying to learn complex systems though.
Alrighty, so kind of the same, but a little different. So why did I sign up? Knowing that I was gonna end quarter 4 as a whatever, start the whole school year learning all these new platforms, being a SAL, being at a new school, being a math coach, still learning that role, and having virtual students, I needed to be able to connect. I was working from home. I needed to be able to say, um, there's engagement, there's interest, there's buy-in, and not have like a tug of war. I didn't want to struggle with the students and say, okay, well, you didn't finish this lesson. Come on, you got to make up that assignment. No, it was the opposite. Hey, okay, great discussion. Let's put that in the parking lot. Oh, you turned your assignment in early. Like that was like a wonderful reflection where I was like, well, I was pleasantly, surprised. It was unexpected. And I just had a aha moment. I was like, well, what have I been doing wrong this whole time? And it's not that I've been doing something the right or wrong way, especially learning how to be a virtual teacher, but it's kind of like the complex system, just learning, reflecting, and learning how to do it a more efficient way.
Mhm.
A little selfish piece, needing that connection. Uh, the eye contact is really not there during virtual. The internet goes in and out, but we made different ways, listening to their voices, we made different ways to fill in those gaps that we were never afforded before, because kind of what Denise was saying, not everyone had access every single day to a computer at school.
Mhm.
So at
Mhm.
home, hey, let me show you how to use Google, or something that was suggested.
Yeah.
The web quest, how do you search around the internet? What's a reliable source? Because they're very into the texting, but when I was a kid, we did Mavis Beacon. We actually learned how to type without looking at the keyboard. So just giving them those snippets of knowledge, which I guess what we're saying directly and indirectly, I wasn't teaching them about the COVID test or how the virus works or about the protein, but we were talking about all these other things that did relate to the pandemic. Um, Me personally wanting to know more about COVID. So if I'm doing my research to plan the lesson with the team, I'm educating myself at the same time, and we're all lifelong educators. Like, I cannot sit up there and say, this is the way, this is what the book says. Like, I need to be educated in order to present it to the students and really explain it in a way, in different forms, DI, in multiple ways, where they're going to be able to explain it to someone else. Um, Wanting that collaboration piece, again, as a new math coach, a new subject area leader at a new school during a pandemic, I was like, I would like to be around like minded professionals, educators, medical professionals, that there's a purpose. We're not just getting together and saying, hey, let's just put in some information. No, we were reflecting, we were tweaking the lessons. Y'all were challenging me to say, okay, well, let me think about that. How can I say this a different way? Or how can I think and again be more efficient and effective? Um, I think one thing that allowed, and I don't know, Denise, if you want to agree or disagree, but allowed us from the first email till today is our personalities. Like, I signed up for this, there was a reason. Having the support from you all, having the support from, it's every level. It was our individual teams, it was the USF team, even being able to present at my school, having this platform and the webinar, having that support, building the confidence, which I mentioned, we need more of that, STEM, especially for young girls, letting them know if you make a mistake, it's okay. We're here for you, and making your priorities. So I said, I want to do this. This is what I want to get out of it, and making that time. And no excuses, even though we're in a pandemic and life happens, but following through and having that team was that accountability piece. So if we said, hey, we're going to do XYZ, and I might have some trouble doing it, but at least I know I have, just like with the kids, you have your shoulder partner, you have your accountability, or you have your parent or your sibling. I think that's what it was. And Dr. Feldman mentioned yesterday, it's interesting that we've never met in person, but we all know little snippets of our lives. And I think that, again, what you were saying played a role into allowing us to follow through with the project, and not just getting by, not just saying, oh, all right, check, we did this lesson, check. Um, Even though it was like a lemon of a year, but just feeling from my student successes that I was successful. They were thriving. It was a pandemic. Um, Whatever the FSA scores say, I feel as though we were successful, and most importantly, they stayed healthy.
Mhm. I think it just shows like the best of the human spirit, that there was such a crisis going on, but we were able to come together for, for supporting children's learning. And I know it just cost everybody who was in the project a lot of effort. And I for one, am just really grateful to Alan Feldman, who sort of rallied us all together. And, when you see tonight sort of what became of it, and how much, even though it was such a struggle, what came out of it, it was really just such an honor to be a part of it.
So there's one question in the chat, and it really follows up what you've been talking about. And that's, how do you think we can continue attending to the students' socio-emotional health as you demonstrated in both the science and math lessons, even when we do not have a pandemic? So let's hope that that's what's going to be happening next school year. So how do you picture doing that? Attending to their socio-emotional health.
It's definitely a village effort. So I know as teachers, we were thrown into a couple of mental health trainings. We do have social workers, school psychologists. Some schools have success coaches, academic coaches. There's RTI. There's at my school, we have a peace room, a Zen room. We try to have all these interventions before an unwanted behavior, which I think all ties into that social emotion. If a student is being disruptive or has an outburst, again, it's kind of like that complex system. You have to get to the root. Why is that happening? Why are they not turning in work? Why are they not attending class? Is it because, right after lunch, their stomach is grumbling, they're growing students? I always tease my students, and I'm like, middle school, you guys have raging hormones, like get it together. And it's just to make kind of light and connect with the kids, but allow them to self-advocate and let like it's a two-way street. Like they still need to be able to say what their needs are in order for us to support them. But again, it's not just the parent, not just school, and not just the community.
Denise, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I agree with Angelique is such a wonderfully caring person. That's come out so many times when she has spoken in our meetings. And we just have to let our students know that we care, and not just saying it, not just, telling them I care about you, but actually showing it, asking them how they're doing each day, and setting aside that time for some personal interaction, and, letting them know that they can come talk to you anytime. And I find that the best times I have is just getting out in, non-classroom times, like in the mornings before kids come to the classroom, or, sitting with them during lunch in the cafeteria and just chit-chatting with them and talking about how things are going. We like to do stuff like that. We are implementing some cool things at our school, a calm down box. So each room is going to have a calm down box. So if a student is, having a moment, they can go to the calm down box and they can just choose some items in there. There might be something for them to, like Play-Doh for them to mold, or a little fidget box, or maybe just a notepad in there for them to write down some things, and several different ideas for them to, just to try and calm down, and maybe some words of inspiration in the calm down box. These are some things that we're talking about right now, what we can put in them to help the kids, because we know that it's definitely a really stressful time, and it's probably not going to get better on August 10th or whatever, when school begins. We know that it's going to continue on, and the effects of this are going to be long lasting.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We're really just right at the end of the time that we allocated for this. It's really been an incredible presentation from Angelique and Denise and our panelists, Marissa and Sarah. We're hoping that this is the first of more of these types of presentations that the Anchin Center will be sponsoring next year, where we're able to, have showcase the work that teachers in our schools are doing, and to support the work of other teachers. So thank you once again, and I hope you all have a great evening. And Angelique and Denise, I hope you're reading what's in the chat, because people are saying really very nice things about you.
Yes, good work.
Good work, yes. Take care. Good night,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Good
Thank
job. Thank you. Thank you, Alan.